read more about Descartes and work on my PhD. I'm like, yeah.
Introduction. Okay, and now.
Oh, I do the introduction?
Yeah, do it.
Woo! This is the Brad and Casey show.
Dun, dun, dun. Drum roll, please. So to all you trolls out there, if you don't like it, get out of here. How's that?
No, I don't mind the trolls. Troll us. It's cool. Because frankly, I don't care. It's all right.
He's a nicer guy than
no,
that.
it just doesn't bother me. I don't care. It's the reason why I don't really interact with the comments very much. And it was surprising because whenever I was interacting with the comments, because you were like, you wanted me to interact with the comments, so I went on there and I went to go interact with the comments, and tons of my comments, like I'd put them in, and then I'd hit them, and they'd say that they were sending, and then they'd never show up. And I was like, oh, fun.
That's one of the weird things about the internet. The only reason I go with comments is because it adds spider food to the search engines. And I'm questioning that these days.
Well, since we're talking about the trolls, I'll tell you what, I'll tell the audience what I was just telling him. So it's funny. So in the last one, they took a snippet of one of the things that we talked about. Mind you, it was 2 weeks ago. We missed last week. There was a bout of stomach flu going on through my house. So it kind of it kind of made me not respond to Brad that we were going to have our normal Monday in a timely fashion. So he thought we were just not going to have the Monday, and I'm glad I did, because it probably prevented him from getting sick. Considering I ended up sick later on that evening.
I don't want to throw up.
So anyhow. So during the process, I was talking about proof of consciousness, and everybody started pointing out Descartes, who says, I think, therefore I am. Just so that way everybody is aware, that is not proof of consciousness, that's proof of existence. I think, therefore I am is proof that he exists. And it's theoretical, so it's all conceptual, whereas if you go by the context of what I was talking about instead of just a little snippet, we were actually talking about hard proof. So they're trying to prove consciousness, and so they did the what's it called? It's basically they were testing photons and how the photons interfere with each other whenever they go through the slits. So it was like the slit experiment. The double slit experiment, that's what it's called.
Yeah.
Thank you. So the double slit experiment, basically, whenever they did the double slit experiment, it ended up to where everybody was like, oh, so, observation influences reality and all this bunch of other stuff that they were like basically trying to have an idea of. Well, then somebody actually disproved that anyone that any person would necessarily need to observe it, only that it was observed, and in the process disproved consciousness. So it was actually a very fascinating, contrary to the whole experiment, and it ended up showing that the double slit experiment did not actually work the way that people were thinking it worked, but at the same exact time, the experiment that they were doing actually ended up bringing into question the type of consciousness we have. Plus, on top of that, consciousness was never really defined in the argument. And I would say I was actually looking for talk about like true consciousness, because there are many theories out there that somehow we're inside like a fated universe, or maybe they were programmed and this is really an AI. There's all these bunch of other theories out there. So my argument would be that if we're programmed to think we're conscious, we can say, I think, therefore I am. We can prove our existence, but we can't prove that we have consciousness. We can't prove that it's consciousness. Because if we're just reacting based off of the program, we're not really conscious.
Right, we're programmed.
Exactly.
By who? By
well,
what?
Exactly. So, I mean, I'm not saying that these things are absolutes, but I'm saying that you can't really prove consciousness, and Descartes does not prove consciousness. He proves existence. He proves self-existence, not existence of anybody else even either.
Well, it's interesting where all these trolls end up going and how they call us stupid. That's just a stupid argument. So that it's interesting that it seems to me that the left side, if you will, the way they
I wouldn't even call it left or right. I would just call it
I'm just saying that, but it seems like the people on that side, they use insults to argue.
I think that is
they call you stupid.
I think that
you can't measure stupid.
I think that is usually the fallback of the intellectually weak. And honestly, there were so many people that kept on bringing that thing about Descartes, and it made me want to bang my head against the wall.
That would be stupid.
Well, it made me feel that way, and the biggest way that it made me feel that way, and it made me like really have this like intellectual brain fart, is because Descartes has nothing to do with consciousness. It only has to do with I think, therefore I am. Most people would say, oh, that's consciousness because he's thinking. But he wasn't proving consciousness. He was only proving self-existence.
Right.
I think, therefore I am.
You're beating a dead horse.
Is about the conscious. It's not about the consciousness.
I got that.
Yeah.
But that went into the whole split window thingy, split slit thing.
Double slit.
Yeah. That was another thing that the people were ranting about, was the concept of time. We were saying that time doesn't exist. It's kind of a made up thing. Well, and then what they did was
there's tons of proofs about that.
I know. But the people that get on here and troll, that's why it's that they're not, they got to be like 8. I think maybe they're 8 years old and they're smart.
Well, I think a lot of these people went to college and therefore they think that they're smart.
Yes,
but really,
I went to college, therefore I think I am.
I love that whole entire sequence of events that happens in Good Will Hunting, where the guy's like, now you're going to talk about this, and next year you're going to talk about this. The difference between me and you is that, I paid about $20 in library late fees to get the education that you just spent, $100,000 to get. Whatever the line was, but it's close to it. I'm like, I agree with that, because that's the same thing with me.
Well, they were talking
I have friends who are professors.
They were talking about Einstein when we were talking about the time thing, and they said, "Haven't you ever heard of Einstein's theory?"
Yeah.
Blah 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 blah. And I said, first off, Einstein's thing was a theory.
It is. That's exactly it.
It's not necessarily true. It's just a theory.
And his theory of relativity ended up disproving the static universe theory, which is the theory that was out there for the longest time. And they have a new theory that's actually emerging right now, which is the variable universe. And the variable universe theory is seeming to disprove the normal theories of relativity that we've come to know, because of the variable universe theory actually says that there is more or less dark matter at any given time or at different points inside the universe, and that the whole universe model that we have based on Big Bang and all this bunch of other stuff really doesn't work in that particular theory. And that is the theory now that is going to become the next big thing. And there's just like in medicine, there's another big change in theory that's happening right now, whereas everybody has treated our bodies like we're the organism and everything that lives in us is just, different types of bacteria and everything else. Whereas a new theory of cellular organisms is growing, where we're actually a macroorganism, much more like what man-o-wars. In the ocean, it's man-o-war is the
Portuguese man-o-war.
Portuguese man-o-war, exactly. It's a complex type thing, but yeah, I mean, I'd listen to these arguments for fun. It's like,
well, I do too, and then I respond to them with something that gets their head thinking. Like when they were talking about time, you can't say that time doesn't exist because of Einstein. And then I also, when they mentioned Einstein, then again, because it's got to do with time, I mentioned the quantum entanglement.
Yeah.
That if something is a bazillion light years away and you do this, it does it at the exact same time. How could time possibly exist if space doesn't matter?
Right. Because space and time are intrinsically connected
because of distance.
And to the observer, something happening, many, many light years away, happens at a different time frame than what it's happening as the person who is locally. So, like, let's say the star explodes, and the star that goes supernova there, And for them, you know, for us, to our star, for example, it'd be like, I think it's like 3 minutes, something like that. It's like 3 to 5 minutes, somewhere right in there. I can't remember the exact time. You can look that up.
You mean
3 to 5 minutes.
You mean the time that the sun gets the heat to the Earth?
So if you have an observer who's like right next to the sun and it goes supernova, right? It's going to happen right then.
Yes.
For us, it happens
in the moment.
For us, it happens, you know, 5 minutes later.
Right.
Right. For somebody at Pluto, I mean, it's going to happen much later.
Yeah.
Somebody, you know,
on Alpha Centauri.
Yeah, it's going to happen much later. And there's actual physics papers about this that you know, that therefore time is really about observation, and it exists more in a wave packet. And all past and present is all happening simultaneously. But the one thing that it brings into question, and that multiple of the different theories bring into question, is that the future. They say the future doesn't really exist yet. And that is the one real variable they have. And that's a very fascinating concept. So as we are interacting, we actually still create our futures. However, past and present don't really, there is no time there anymore.
There's one thing I find intriguing, because these are the kind of topics we're going to shift a little bit into the retreats and mastermind concept. I can see going to Costa Rica and doing a mastermind about this kind of stuff and just sit around and talk about this kind of stuff. It could be fun.
It would be. It would be.
But the idea of, if you were to go into your past and kill your grandmother wouldn't have a daughter to be your mother. So you could not exist. So how could you possibly go into the past to do that?
Right. There's two fascinating theories actually based off of that, because there's a lot of science fiction works that have actually, you know, kind of sparked minds to think about these sort of things. And so one of them is that, you know, basically you create an alternate timeline. You're not actually in your own timeline anymore. So whenever you jump back to the present, you'd still jump back to your present. Or you could jump back to the present that's actually in the alternative timeline. But either way, they're both timelines still exist.
So dual universes kind of thing?
Well, it's a multiverse type thing, yeah. So where there's multiple different universes all being created at any given time.
Well, how would that work then? You'd have to be two different people. Because if you went back and killed your mother, you couldn't exist.
Well, I mean, you know, the theory is that every single possible
or you're not supposed to say killed, you're supposed to say unalived. Or is that just TikTok?
That's TikTok, yeah. If you don't say unalive, they shadow ban you. I don't know if they do that on YouTube, but I mean, I don't really care. This is
I don't either.
Thing, right?
I don't either. People got to grow up. Get a helmet, as Candace Owens.
We have an observer. Hey.
We have an observer?
Yep, it says 1. I think it says 1. Yep, 1.
Okay.
Well, 1.
That might be Mike Wilkie. Mike Wilkie, if that's you, make a little comment. I can't reach the screen from here, but we'll see a little red thing pop on the upper right if that's Mike Wilkie.
Oh, yeah.
I won't know. We won't know who it is till tomorrow.
I don't know. We can go look at the comments. If we clicked on comments, we can look at the comments right now.
If they accepted permission for Facebook to show their name, because everybody's scared of being seen, which drives me crazy on the internet. If you don't want to be seen, get off the freaking internet.
I think later on, at the end of this, I want to actually pull up the comments and reply to any comments that we get. But yeah, so anyhow,
well, you would be able to do it on your phone.
It was very fascinating. A lot of these topics are just super fascinating to me. I had a client that I just finished doing. We just did some review stuff with, who I think would probably enjoy this topic with us sometime.
Deep thoughts.
Yeah, it'd be really fun. But yeah, anyhow,
it is.
What's our topics for today again?
it is interesting to talk about this stuff, but then we eventually get to a place. I always do. All of a sudden, there's really nothing to talk about. You come to a place where it's like, I agree.
Because it's all theoretical.
I know. And you get to a place and you think, you know what are we even talking about this for? Let's go grab something to eat.
It's either, you know, I mean, the thing is that the pursuit of the intellectual, the true pursuit of the intellectual is accumulation of knowledge, but the only way to accumulate knowledge is by having more conversation. And there does come a point, though, where the conversation has been had so many times where there's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
So for a while there in the 90s, philosophy was considered dead. Like there's new philosophies that are coming out now. But for a while back in the 90s, philosophy was considered dead because everybody was like, oh, all these conversations already happened. There's nothing new that's going to be talked about. And I mean, that was literally the topic. Everybody was like, other than ethics, philosophy is dead.
Well, that's where I get to the I am the existence kind of thing, because I say there's no such thing as a fact other than I exist. Everything else is just it's just a theory.
Right.
Because I know that I exist, but I don't know that you do. You might be a figment of my imagination. Yeah. I just know my own self. And you know what's another interesting thing is sometimes when you talk to someone that's a Christian and you say something about like, we might not physically exist because of the molecules and all that stuff. We might just be a hologram.
Yeah.
They say, well, if I punched you, you'd feel it. And it's kind of interesting why they get violent.
If I punch you, you'd feel it.
Yeah. Why is that?
Well, I mean, maybe we just feel it because we're programmed to think that we would.
That's kind of my point, is the reason we can't pass through solid is because we don't think that we can.
So have you heard the story of Bodhidharma?
No.
The Buddhist of compassion who was manifest. He was said to be the starting of Buddhism in the world.
I don't.
So there's this story about him where he began meditation, right? And he sat in the same place and he was meditating for an extraordinary amount of time. And this is one of the many stories that are about him. But this particular one is the most fascinating one, I think, because of how well it's documented in 3 different cultures. And it was the king of the area, equivalent of a king. It was kind of in a little area, you know, in between kind of the China and India and Mongolia area, depending on where you read the story is depending on where it happened. So, because the story's repeated. And basically what ended up happening is that this king wanted him summoned because he was upset that he wasn't there to talk to him anymore. And the story about this Bodhidharma was originally that he was a prince. He just gave up everything. He walked off and he just did his own thing. And anyhow, so he was sitting there in meditation and they came along to go get him and he wouldn't move. And then he just continued sitting there. So they built a little shrine around him and he wasn't eating or anything, but he wasn't losing weight and he wasn't like having any problems. And he just was like a statuesque like figure. Nobody can get him to move. Nobody could do anything. Like
I
they
remember
tried to move him and everything else. Well, as the story progresses and they're trying to get him to move, finally this king gets mad and he goes over there and they're like, okay, well, you know, I want him moved. So they, you know, tried to strike him. It didn't work. It was like hitting stone. And then they tried to pick him up. They couldn't do it. It was like he was rooted to the earth. And then they threw a rope around him and they went to go drag him off with the horse and the ropes would snap and they just were not able to move him. It was harder to move than moving a tree. Like he was just rooted there. And all of this was all going on and they were just like, what the heck? And then one day he just gets up and he moves. But the whole time they weren't able to move him or anything else. And he wouldn't move. So I think that, to my point, is that I think a lot of what we think is reality is in part is our expectation of it. I'm not sure that reality is really as objective as anyone would like to believe. In fact, there's a lot of science that would say that reality is only subjective. We don't really have an objective reality because, you know, even if we can measure it through scientific material, we're programming it to think like we do.
Well, I
because
thought
that's how we
about that.
think.
I thought about that. I had like a visualization, or also as a Star Trek episode or something, of all these pedestals with like dishes, glass bowls over the top of these brains, and all these brains were individuals. So there was no body. It was just a consciousness of individuals, and they were talking to each other.
Mhm.
They're just thinking that they existed. And I've had those kind of thoughts before.
Yeah. Well, there
just
was that episode with Q too, where he talks about it. They would like, there's so many episodes with Q, but it was one of the early ones where he was laughing about, these puny, three-dimensional beings that are around because, Q, they were all called Q, but the Q that became, part of the Star Trek universe was as an individual, like to play in this world like Loki, like a god. And
Mhm.
and he even at one point said that we all think we understand the universe, and the reality is that we're barely scratching the surface, and
Well,
that
I guess.
time doesn't really exist the way that we think it
Well,
does,
when
and
they
all that
say
other
that
stuff.
the universe is infinite, what is the surface?
Right.
What is the distance
Right.
of infinity? So there really isn't many. And that ends up being the sort of like the microcosm and the macrocosm thing, and
Yeah.
the God within is like healing from within instead of, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well,
These guys don't know.
going back to Q, right? Do you remember that episode where he took Jean-Luc Picard, which Jean-Luc Picard in the Star Trek universe is quite the philosopher, and he was kind of a ship captain and a philosopher and all kinds of other things, and he would spend a lot of time doing tons of different stuff. So he was like well versed in a lot of mysteries of the universe. And if you recall, like he took Jean-Luc Picard, he started bouncing around time, took him to Earth whenever they were still a primordial sludge. And he goes, "Oh, look, there's where you come from, this primordial sludge." And he's like talking to, talking to him like he's, subhuman. And he goes, "Q, I don't have any time for this game, for these games. It doesn't really matter what you say or anything else. I have a duty and I have an existence that is mine, and you can't tell me anything different." And really, the point of it was that Jean-Luc Picard was getting at is that it doesn't really matter that you want to play these games with me. That is not your existence, is not my existence. You're experiencing something different than I'm experiencing. And just because you're saying this is so doesn't make it so in my head. Send me back where I came from. I like that existence, and I'm going to go back to it. And that was really what the point was. And I think I think that's a very fascinating concept to a
So
lot of
does
people.
Jean-Luc go to his back where he wants to go to, or does he need Q to do it?
Jean-Luc has to take, or I'm sorry, Q has to take him back.
That's unfortunate. He should just say, like, fuck you.
But he doesn't have the power. Yeah, he doesn't have the power of the Q. Whereas the Q were these infinite godlike beings who existed in wormholes, basically, and that's why they were out of.
Well, it's kind of like in the Matrix when Neo all of a sudden learned that there was no spoon and he was able to control the fabric of matter.
Right, but things didn't really work that way in the Star Trek universe. Just because he realized that time and space didn't work the way that he thought that they did, didn't mean that he gained the powers.
Picard's got to go back to school.
Yeah, he was still a three-dimensional being.
So let's talk a little bit about the stuff that you know about microdosing.
Yeah.
And the concept of psychedelics in healing. Because back in the Beatles times, the doing those kind of things was more of a party, and now it's becoming of a mainstream kind of thing, which is interesting. Because some of that stuff is still illegal to be participating in.
All of it's pretty illegal still, except for ketamine. Ketamine is legal, but it's very controlled still.
I know, but that's what's happening. Is marijuana is legal.
Kind of.
In Minnesota.
kind of.
Well,
But yeah.
I can smell it driving down the freeway. It's got to be
Oh my
legal.
God, I can smell it everywhere anymore. I was at the park with my kids the other day and I was smelling it. And this is the thing. I have been a pothead at several different points in my life, and I don't really care if people smoke or they don't smoke. And I didn't smoke for a good decade too. And like, I was a total teetotaler, much like you are now. And I did not smoke or drink or anything. And I have to say that I don't really care if people are smoking, but at the park, really, with a bunch of little kids around,
Well,
come on now.
no. Well, it depends. Are the kids getting a contact buzz because they're near it, or they just don't like you just don't like.
As strongly as I smelt it, it
They could.
like somebody was smoking it while sitting there right next to the play structures.
Yeah.
That's the way it smelled.
Yeah, and they're doing it in cars, which could inhibit your driving skills.
Illegal in Minnesota. You're not even allowed to sit inside your car while it's parked. They just released the new laws.
I know, but they're still doing it.
Yeah.
Anyways, my point was that the stuff is starting to be more mainstream, and here we are even able to talk about it.
Yeah.
Instead of, I don't know, where we get shut down or blackballed or whatever.
That used to happen. People would talk about it and they would just come shut you down.
Yeah.
Police would smash all your stuff and be like, well, that's what you get.
But it's not, I mean, granted, there's all people that still do the DMT and get high recreationally and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the healing elements of it. And you can take the extremes of PTSD in the Vietnam War where things are blowing up and you're in serious trauma. And then there's subtle things like a little kid wouldn't go to bed and mom said, damn it, and it scared the hell out of you.
Yeah.
Is that it could be the same trauma.
It could be. I actually did. I was talking about my recent client, and there was something that a recent client brought up. I'm not saying any names, so in case my recent client hears any of this, just know I'm not gonna use any names or anything, so nobody will know. But anyhow, so he talked a little bit about how having a father who yells, and I'm yelling, so like it definitely made me pay attention.
Well, Monica doesn't like that because her father was vocal.
Yeah,
so she doesn't like it if you raise your voice.
I come from an incredibly loud family. My dad's side of the family was not, but my mom's side of the family were all loud.
But that could be something where if you're a little kid and you gradually get into it.
Yeah.
But if someone all of a sudden just snaps, it could scare you and startle you.
Right.
And that little thing could trigger something inside of your brain.
Could, yeah.
So that was going to bring me into another thing that we kind of talked about in our previous one was, do I have the same amount of neurons and what do they call them when they're between each other? What is that?
Synapses?
Yeah. Do I have the same amount of them in my brain as you do in yours?
No.
Because of the size of the brain?
No.
Do they grow and then die off?
Yes.
They're plastic?
So, yeah. So it's actually a very interesting, complicated thing, and it's much newer science that we actually know. Now, I'm not a neurologist, so I'm going to say that flat out. I'm not a neurologist. I have studied a lot of this, but this is not going to be perfect.
Well, let's do a disclaimer. We have no idea what we're talking about, so we're disclaiming any of this stuff. It could be all bullshit. We don't know.
Well, there you go. We'll just say that.
See, that's one thing
I do know what I'm talking about in theory, but
it's the one thing I wanted to do is put.
What is that symbol? Oh, I guess our connection was iffy for a second there. That's what it looked like. Yeah, we have two people on though. Yeah.
That happens.
So
I was saying that I've always wanted to have a disclaimer on our birth certificate that says I'm responsible for my own actions. It'll put the lawyers out of business, but you are responsible for your own actions. If you listen to something we do and you take action on it, you're responsible, not us, because we're just talking about shit.
As a disclaimer. Yep. So anyway, so going back to what I was going to say though is that you were asking about
the number of neurons. And synapse and
so we grow new connections in our brain. So that's new neural pathways and everything else at ridiculously high rates whenever we're young. And it begins to slow down as we get older, but it really begins to slow down about the age of 6. It slows down. That's the first like big slowdown. And then we have another really big slowdown that happens at about 14 or 15.
Makes sense.
That's another big slowdown. And then it begins to continuously slow down until we get into our 20s. And I think it's about mid 20s. I thought it was like 24 is right about the range where we actually begin to.
Is that because college kind of shuts it all down?
we begin to actually solidify the pathways that are there, and we begin to strengthen those, and we stop developing near as many new ones. We are still developing them, but as we get older, we let a lot of those old pathways begin to just go away because we're not using them as much, right? Now, that is an interesting tidbit about somebody like myself who actually has experimented with a lot of psychedelics in his life. Now, psychedelics have been shown to actually bring you to about that age, about 14, 15, 16, neurologically. You start building that many pathways again. And if that's the case, and then there's another really interesting, I'll say this part first. It's another really interesting thing. Cannabis actually changes the amounts of white brain matter versus gray brain matter, which white brain matter is more dense than the gray brain matter. So there's more neural activity and more neural connectivity going on in the white matter versus the gray matter. I mean, there's other different things that are involved in that as well. So while the overall mass of the brain is not different, they have shown that that there's more white brain matter in cannabis smokers. Very interestingly, yeah. So it's just really.
You mean if they're smoking
tidbit.
it, all of a sudden that makes white matter grow more because of the
Begins to
cannabis?
make more white. Yeah.
So that's why they get stupider and stupider?
No, it doesn't. That is funny, but it actually. So if you ever saw the documentary Super High Me, this guy, as a thing, he wanted to see if that would change, IQ would change or anything like that. They found that the IQ didn't change at all. Now, for me personally, I have a fairly high IQ actually. The official IQ, I've done a different types of IQ tests and everything else, but the one that I tend to go by as far as the rate goes is 167. That was like right, kind of like in that kind of
I don't know.
sweet
That
spot
makes
in the
as much
middle,
sense as blood pressure.
which
I don't know. I don't understand.
So that's about like the right range. So like if I smoke cannabis, like for like a good day and a half, I feel like I've lost about 10 IQ points. Like
That ain't
reality wise, I just feel that way. For a good like day and a half, I feel that way.
I'm more interested in like reconnecting those connections, because
now that, on the other hand, see that's why I was talking about the whole thing with amount of neurons and the amount of connectivity and stuff like that. So the research is showing that, and they watch this on brain scans, that psilocybin, LSD, those are the two that they've done the brain scans on.
And DMT?
They are doing brain scans on DMT, but I don't know if they were looking for neural connectivity. Now, my understanding is that all of the psychedelics that are true psychedelics.
Is ayahuasca a true psychedelic?
Yes.
Okay.
DMT is a true psychedelic. Ecstasy or something like that is not necessarily going to be a true psychedelic. That's an empathogen. It's not.
Isn't that more of a chemically synthesized type of thing?
It is chemically synthesized, but it's also what it does to you. It actually makes you. It's called an empathogen because it makes you empathetic, like very. It makes your empathy extremely high during that time frame, to the point to where you're kind of empathic in a way. Like you can actually feel other people's emotions, and also it releases the floods of what's the chemical I'm thinking about, the not dopamine, the one that is the trust hormone. I'm trying to think of what that is off the top of my head. And for some reason, I'm drawing a blank on that. I talk about this all the time.
That
and
might
I'm
have
drawing a
been
blank on that one right now.
That might have been the smoking.
I haven't smoked at all recently. But yeah, so basically that's why it falls under empathogen, is because of that. But with the neurotransmitters, going back to the neurotransmitters, so
Yeah.
whenever you take something like psilocybin, basically you start developing new neurotransmitters again. So it really helps with making new patterns in your life. It helps with breaking old patterns. Sorry, I guess I didn't have that on mute. I thought I did.
Doesn't matter.
It
It's a way of
helps.
life.
It helps break habits. It helps grow new habits. It will help you with getting out of ruts. So like
Niche.
so like if you have thoughts that are occurring over and over and over and over again. So
And you won't know unless someone tells you, if you're in your own little bubble.
well, I mean, it's not normal for somebody to keep thinking about the same thing over and over and over and over and over again.
Right. It's not, but they do.
There are people who do. Yeah. It's so it's actually something they look for in psychology.
I do.
But it helps with that.
I've been using social media for a long time and I can't get out of it.
Well, that's different. That's not a thought. We're not talking about,
It's an addiction.
We're not talking about rumination. Like I'm talking about more like rumination.
What's that?
It's repeating thoughts over and over again in your head. Like
Well, I
if
mean,
only,
isn't that
yeah,
like
like if only I did this differently, I wouldn't be in this place in my life. Oh, and then you just think about the scenario over and over and over again. Or like, let's say PTSD, right? So you're thinking about a certain negative thing that happened to you in your life,
Mhm.
and that keeps coming up over and over and over and over again. And sometimes the ruminating thought is survivor syndrome, where you're like, none of them are here. I shouldn't be here either. I should have died with them. Why am I still here?
Oh, that's extreme stuff.
Yeah,
I'm talking more about
but it repeats. It's like literally like a cycle, and
well,
it
it
creates
does
a
for
rut.
me. I end up getting in a rut. I don't like change. So to go home, I will go the same way I've always gone home, just because it's a habit. It's just more
Okay,
efficient.
so
I have to force myself to say I'm taking a different route.
so that would actually be an example of a reinforced neural connectivity. So rumination and a reinforced neural connection like that would be something similar, because you're
Mhm.
used to taking the same route over and over again. Well, something like psilocybin can cause that to change.
Right.
So it can get you out of that rut, and it can actually form new connections, and you might choose something different.
And ayahuasca could do the same, similar type thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah.
Because I know that I get into these same things, and it's a ritual thing. I wake up at a certain time, and my first thing is you go into the bathroom, take a leak, and then you go out and make coffee.
Yeah.
And
So you
sometimes you
asked
gotta do something different.
So you asked specifically about microdosing, right?
Yes.
So microdosing has a lot of the health benefits without having to have the hallucinatory effects. Now, if somebody's coming to me and they're having like suicidal thoughts, and they're like in an extreme case scenario, um, I would recommend a larger dose. Like I would recommend that they really look into again, disclaimer here, right?
Yeah.
That you're in charge of your own actions, and I'm just giving advice here based off of my own personal history.
Yeah.
And what I'm basically saying is that a bigger dose like that, if you're with somebody who knows what they're doing and how to handle it, and you know, I would definitely recommend working with somebody like myself who not only has experience with the science behind it, but has experience with the spiritual aspects of things behind it, like, you know, the energy that's being called on and things like that.
Mhm.
And that can break that. It can literally throw you out of that horrible bad depression, and it can fix it. And if you go to maps.org, that's maps.org, you can actually research any research that's been done on it. And I would go on there and I would look at what's happened with OCD if you have, say, panic attacks or you have anxiety. It's related to the same part of the brain as OCD. And it literally, psilocybin 1-2 uses can actually cure OCD permanently. Like OCD is gone.
Is that because certain connections are reconnected to some other places?
It's like it allows you to fill in those grooves that you've created over the many years.
Because I suppose if you used up all the little connections, and I visualize this almost like wiring up like an electrical system.
Yeah.
You got all these things that are all connected to things. You need to rewire it so it functions differently. Because if you're having these thoughts, suicidal thoughts, I think I've never been suicidal. I never had the experience, but I think it's when you hit like, I don't have any other answers. I'm sick of this and I don't know what else to
Right.
do. So this is my last resort. And then you do that. Or there's that cry for help.
I don't understand it. And I have actually had the whole suicidal thing happen to me one time. Like, I mean, I've had those thoughts in my life just simply because, you know, like you hear about it and stuff like that. But it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, that's not really an answer to anything. That's always like
Well,
kind
that's
of,
the way I look at it logically.
I don't think death is really like, it just really isn't an answer to anything. And you know, there was one time though where somebody had convinced me, who used to be in my life, who is no longer in my life. It was my ex-wife, and she convinced me, you know, to go on, I think it was Prozac. So she basically was like, "Oh yeah, you're having anger issues." And I told her, I said, "I'm not having anger issues. I'm pissed off at you." And she's a whole different thing. And she was like, "No, no, you're having anger issues. You need to go see the doctor." So I went to the doctor thinking that the doctor was going to be like, "Okay, yeah, maybe you need to go have a conversation with somebody about this." And instead, he just wrote me a script and just be like, "Oh, okay, you're having, okay, yeah, I'm here. You need Prozac." And just gave me Prozac. And I was like, "Okay, so you're telling me I should take this?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, I was stupid. And I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll just listen to what the doctor said." And I took it for 3 days. And I had never been so crazy out of my head in my life. Like, it was weird. And I was in a whole danger space. It was one of those things where like I was in this crazy danger space. Like, my ex-wife was not around. She was back in California visiting her family, and I started taking it right before she left. And it was like, "Oh yeah, this is okay. You're fine. You just keep taking it." And then she left. And so 2 days later, I'm like curled up in the corner, not able to get out of bed, and I'm crying like a little tiny baby. And I was totally having like weird suicidal feelings and suicidal thoughts. And I realized immediately it was the medication. Luckily, I realized it.
So you had the anger stuff, the pissed off stuff. They gave you the drug, and that brought you into that suicidal thought.
And it made me crazy out of my head. Yeah. But for people trying to get off of things like Prozac and stuff like that, stopping doing it, you can actually have the same effect, which is another area where microdosing comes into play.
Mhm.
So microdosing can actually allow you to wean off of your medication, because microdosing has a positive mood enhancing effect.
Sure.
And you don't feel it. So other than the fact that
Well,
you
that's
don't have
what I think
symptoms.
that like, okay, we go to the marijuana kind of thing. You start having these, wow, like I didn't imagine that. You come up with new ideas.
Mhm.
Like the idea of the entire universe on the head of a pin. Your brain thinks of possibility. Whereas I think when you get to a certain place, the suicidal thing, that there's no other way to go, and this is my only option left.
Right.
And I could never comprehend the concept of suicide, because what if there was a possibility still?
Yeah.
There's still that possibility. And if I decided to die, what if that was the wrong thing to do? I'm still in control
Right.
when I'm alive. What if I decide to kill myself and there is this God, and this God says, you fucked up. And I'm, oh man, I don't like being here. I want to go back. Too bad. So that's why I wouldn't go down that road. I want to still be in a little bit of a choice, be able to make my own decisions.
Sure.
So that's why I can't comprehend the idea. I've thought about it, but not as a process. I have gone down a two-way road, I wonder what would happen if I went like that in front of the semi. I've had that thought. But
Right.
I would never do it.
But that's, I mean, I equate those kind of thoughts to, standing in a stream, and all the thoughts that are passing you aren't necessarily yours. You know what I mean? It's, because our brains are literally thinking about every possible scenario all the time.
Okay, so I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, driving down the road, that might be somebody else's thought.
No, more along the lines of our brains literally are thinking about every single possible scenario at every given moment.
Right.
Just because it passed through your brain doesn't really mean you own that thought.
Sure. Stuff's just coming and going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I also think that, I think that as a collective consciousness, because I do believe in that. I mean, there's a reason why there's a bunch of studies out there, including genetic studies, that have shown that sometimes a concept will happen, it'll reach a certain critical mass in an isolated scenario, and then boom, all of a sudden it jumps oceans. And
I have thought about it as using
somewhere else.
the concept of suicide as a cry for help kind of thing to be able to get attention. But I think about, if I did that, they'd hate me. They'd be really mad if I was just fucking around like that.
I think it's a cry for help sometimes when it's not even, I want to kill myself. Meaning that sometimes I feel like I want to die doesn't actually mean I'm in danger of killing myself. Sometimes I feel like I want to die is because you don't see a valid way of breaking out of a certain specific area.
Right. You don't have any other choices. It seems like there's no other
Yeah.
answers. And I'd be fine if all of a sudden the plane crashed right now.
But depression can hit you in a lot of different ways. I mean, sometimes it's not always like that. Sometimes it's anger. Sometimes it's running away. Sometimes it's all kinds. So there was actually a prior client of mine who has now sought better life out west, and I certainly hope that it helps her because of the seasonal depression from being here and everything else. She was thinking about abandoning her children, like children that were still nursing. She was like, yeah, I'm just gonna leave. I'm just gonna go, and I'm not gonna stop driving until I get to Texas. I'm just gonna go.
And somebody will just find them.
She's just gonna leave them at home, and her husband would
Oh, there's somebody else
get
there
back home.
to deal with it.
Yeah, and just
I could
leave.
see something like that, because it's kind of like a problem. I don't want to do this anymore. I didn't really want kids. I don't want the burden. Somebody else can deal with it. So let that dude do it. I'm out of here.
I can see how somebody would feel that way, but I mean, it requires a severe amount of depression to go. Oh, excuse me.
Am I boring you?
No, not at all. I think, yeah, I think it was more of a yawn about the oxygen level or something. But there we go. Let's try some breaths. Let's do some holotropic breathing here. Yeah. Yeah. No, it was.
Should we just stop right now on this little morbid conversation about suicide? Just stop.
I don't think it's more. I think it's a conversation people need to have more.
I'm just joking, because I like joking around about stuff. And I've been in depressed situations, and sometimes I just think, okay, I'm just going to go onto YouTube and watch some comedy. That's fun. I've just changed my thought.
The only serious depression I've ever had in my entire life was that experience that I told you about with the Prozac.
Other than that, I think you can just change your environment.
As soon as I stopped taking that, I was fine again.
I can imagine. I mean, like I mentioned early on in our things about in high school, I took a little piece of the water acid stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That was LSD, right?
It is, yeah, if it's called acid.
And it was just a little teeny little thing, and I don't know where I'm going with this, but it was totally out of control. So I can imagine if you take something like Prozac or something like that, it's not you. I don't like drugs. I don't like the stuff that like that. When I had my little heart issue, the doctor wanted to give me some stuff. I said, I want these stuff. And then they were going to do a little deal with because I had a hole in my heart, and put a little umbrella thing in there. It's an experimental thing. So, we wouldn't charge you for it or anything. I thought, experiment on me. I don't want no little umbrella thing in my heart. Wear that shit around. So I didn't do that either. I don't like doctors.
I get that. I understand. I mean, sometimes
I think the Hippocratic Oath and the Hippocratic Oath are very similar.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah, I mean, I think that the modern medical industry is really all about money, and I think that there are some people who are in it that really genuinely care. I really do. I've had a couple of really good doctors in my life. There was a doctor that I had while I was out here in Minnesota that I went to go see, and my dad ended up seeing him while he was living out here too. He liked him so much, he would, even after he moved to St. Paul, he wanted to continue coming back all the way to Crystal to, they end up going to go see that doctor. And it was, that doctor was really cool. And he was the kind of doctor who would say, oh yeah, I don't trust any new medication because, that medication doesn't have 40 years of history.
Well, it's a lot of this stuff. Like if the insurance covers it, of course, we'll check that box. And it's kind of like what happened with the COVID thing, where people are all, they died of COVID. So that just checks that box. It ends up being a money thing, which I'll segue into something else, and then we'll kind of close this out because it's time, I think. What do we have here? Yeah, it's 5:57.
Oh, geez, that went quick.
But I was watching it. This is off topic totally, but it's a similar kind of thing. It's all about the money thing.
Yeah.
They had a bag of bearings, bushings, and it was for these fighter jets. This bag was just like a baggy bag, like you'd carry marijuana in the olden days. A little baggy like that. Guess how much they were charging for these bushings? Go ahead and get crazy.
$1,000.
$90,000. That's what the guy said.
$90,000.
You can't charge somebody $90,000 for a bag of bushings just because they're specially engineered for a fighter jet. If that's true, that kind of stuff, that's the kind of crazy money that the military industrial complex is. It's crazy.
They do, yeah. They really.
I'd rather lose the war, for crying out loud. It's a waste of money.
Well, some of these bombs that they're dropping and stuff, they cost like $100,000.
It's crazy. It's crazy. It's crazy. So stop fighting.
So there's a few, like even the dummy bombs cost over 10 grand.
It's ridiculous. And then it just blows up and it's gone. And then Halliburton comes and sweeps the floor and somebody else makes a bunch of money.
Yeah.
That's a whole other topic.
It's a lot of broken window theory going on.
We can talk about we can talk about that at the next one. So what do you want to sign off with?
Comments. Let's check.
There's no comments. I can't see the little envelope in the upper right.
Oh, we didn't get any comments?
There's no little dot there. Too bad. So nobody's there. But
there was.
This is
we had 3 at one point.
That was probably Mike Wilkie. Because this just happened. I was trying to get onto the group that I got, a Facebook group. They're not there anymore. And I thought maybe something happened. So I tried to reconnect it and they're not there. So StreamYard or Facebook no longer allows groups to stream. I can't stream to groups.
Oh.
That irritates me because that's what I want. I want to talk to groups, not people on the page. I want to, if we're spending this money to get people into our groups, we should be able to talk to them. So boo, if that's Zuckerberg doing that. I don't think it's StreamYard. I think it's Facebook trying to be in control. But that is irritating to me, and that's why I want to maybe pitch this in the lake.
Yeah, and with the TikTok ban and everything else, yeah, it's kind of
all that stuff.
Kind of a little crazy.
So you're not going to be able to take control of us, we the people. We know how to use the internet.
I am fairly certain that this whole experience that everybody has been having is making everybody so sick of the way that they're trying to control the internet that they're going to push through Web 3.0. I think that is what is coming next, because people have to realize
who's they pushing it through.
The people, the pro-control people, right, have been pushing through things like TikTok ban and controls over the internet and all this bunch of stuff. But the internet was built by a bunch of pro hackers. And I mean pro hackers as in they're for it. Like, I mean, the internet was literally built by a bunch of people who were hackers.
Yeah. I think it's got to end up
I don't think that it's going to stay. I think Web 3.0 is now, I think that everybody's like, okay, yep, this is it. We're done with you guys. We're just going to go full on towards Web 3.0.
And when you say we, it's we the people.
Freedom-oriented people.
We're going to use the internet.
Free information-oriented people.
We're going to use access to the internet.
That is we, because I am a free orientation person.
We're going to be able to utilize our internet the way we want to use it. We're not going to use Facebook. We're going to use our own little things that we create. You don't get to know what they are. It ain't going to be big Silicon Valley people.
Yeah.
You and me will just use our own little thing, whatever the heck that might be.
Yeah. Well, Web 3.0 is pretty amazing. Like, I can't wait till they come up with it. So hopefully somebody out there ends up hearing my cry for Web 3.0. Hurry up and let it get here. Like, I know there's a bunch of people who want to push for this Web 3.0.
It's already here.
Let's just do it and just, like, screw all these people trying to control us. Web 3.0 for the win.
I think it's already here. I think people are already using it, and we just aren't. It's like a speakeasy. Okay. All right. I'm gonna sign off.
Okay.
Be good. Be kind. Be nice. See you later. Bye. Where's the little button? Take care. Remember, be nice. Be nice. See ya. Bye.